Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, we're digging into something a lot of people carry very quietly: the urge to lose, the instinct to give in, and the kind of relationship pattern where collapsing feels like the only way to keep the peace. But before I get into it, I want to thank both all of my longtime listeners and those of you who are just finding the show now. All of your questions, your feedback, your willingness to ask some of this uncomfortable stuff, that's what keeps this space growing. And if you haven't yet, I am going to ask you to take a moment, like, subscribe, rate my show on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're tuning in. This helps others find the show, keep the conversations growing. Even if you share a link of one of my episodes with them, it really does allow me to keep the audience growing and reach more people who may need to hear some of these conversations. If you'd like, there's also a donate button in the show's description if you want to support the work that I do here. Every little bit helps. Now, let's talk about collapse. Some people yell during a conflict, others shut down. And then there are those who just go quiet. They fold, they say sorry when they don't mean it, they chase after someone who's hurt them, they beg for forgiveness even when they're the one that's still bleeding. If that's you, or if that's ever been you, this episode's going to kind of hit close to home. Now, I hear this all the time in my work. People say, I can't resist crawling back, or, I feel pathetic for always being the one to apologize. And the truth is, it's not always about weakness. A lot of the time, it's about survival, especially if you were raised to believe that love comes with conditions or that keeping people close means disappearing a little bit at first. Collapse is often a learned behavior, not a personality flaw. It's not a sign that you're broken or dramatic. It's a way some of us learn to keep relationships from falling apart, and for many, it started early. So today, we're going to be talking about that, the collapse response. What it is, where it comes from, how it shows up in both our vanilla world and our kink relationships, and what it might mean to stop defaulting to losing as your safest position. Because for a lot of people, standing their ground doesn't feel empowering. It feels terrifying. So let's start with the core question here. What do I mean by collapse? Collapse is what happens when you stop standing up for yourself, not because you suddenly agree or because you feel calm, but because something inside of you has decided that giving in is the safest way out. It's not peace. It's that kind of emotional duck and cover. Collapse is when you feel your backbone goes missing mid-conversation, and it's when you say sorry before you've even thought about whether you need to, when you default to yes, not out of desire, but out of fear of disconnection. Now, this isn't about being passive. It's not about being too nice. It's definitely not about lacking confidence. This is a lot deeper. Collapse is a survival behavior. Plain and simple. For some people, it's how they learn to stay attached. If love was unpredictable growing up or conflict was unsafe, collapse becomes kind of an emotional reflex, if you will. If you disappear a little just to stay close. Now, we talk about fight, flight, and freeze. Collapse sits somewhere between freeze and fawn. You're not fleeing, but you're definitely not standing. You're not truly consenting, but you're not objecting either. You've just shut it down. Quietly, internally, and sometimes even with a smile. So take a second here. Really ask yourself, have you ever said, I'm fine, when you weren't, just to stop a fight? Have you ever given affection, maybe sex, or even forgiveness, just to keep someone else from pulling away? Have you ever been mid-argument and suddenly you're the one apologizing even though you started out hurt? That's the collapse. And if you've done that, you're not broken, you're not dramatic, you're likely someone whose nervous system was trained to make peace by making yourself disappear. Now, collapse can feel like a fog rolling in. You might go numb, your throat might tighten a little bit, your chest might feel hollow, your words might sound calm, even practiced, but inside, something is shutting down. You're out of the fight before it even starts, and a lot of people only realize it after the fact. You walk away from a conversation thinking, why didn't I say what I needed to say? Or worse, why did I apologize when I didn't do anything wrong? So I want to give you a little bit of an example here. I'm going to use some abstract names because I'm going to keep people out of it, but these are examples tied to things I've worked with or seen or have read about. So let's take Laura, for example. She's in a long-term relationship. Whenever her partner gets mildly frustrated, her body immediately tenses. She nods a lot. She tries to smooth it over. Her friends keep telling her to speak up, but they don't understand how deep this goes for her. For Laura, being blamed feels more tolerable than being left. So she collapses over and over, time and time again, and then she beats herself up for it later. Or let's bring something from the lifestyle. Let me talk about Marcus here. He identifies as a submissive, finds himself drawn to harsh degradation scenes. Now, on paper, everything is negotiated, but afterwards, he doesn't always feel good. He feels scraped out. He tells himself it's just a drop, but deep down he knows he's reenacting something old. The surrender he offers isn't just erotic, it's compulsive. It doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like a habit. And then there's Elise, who says, I don't even know what I feel during a fight anymore. I just go blank. I hear myself agreeing, apologizing, even fixing, and then later I realize I never even got a word in. She calls it people-pleasing, but really, it's collapse. And then we have Darren. Darren broke up with his girlfriend after months of a lot of emotional distance. He knew it was the right decision, but a few days later, he's texting her, begging to talk, offering to work on himself. Not because anything really changed, but because guilt and silence felt really unbearable. He collapsed back into the contact just to feel like he wasn't the villain, right? If you're hearing some of these examples and you're maybe even feeling called out, good. That means we're starting to navigate the right territory. Collapse is subtle. It's socialized. It's often praised as emotional maturity or flexibility. But underneath, it's usually fear of being rejected, abandoned, unloved, or seen as being too difficult. And if it's been happening for a long time, you may not even know what your real needs are anymore. You've been managing everyone else's so much that you forgot what yours are. So here's the thing. Collapse is a survival skill. If you've learned it, it's because it worked, even once. Maybe a long time ago, maybe in a home that punished your voice, maybe in a relationship that taught you love was conditional. But just because something once kept you safe doesn't mean it's still serving you now. So I really want to break down collapse a little bit more for you. And now that we've walked through what it feels like, I want to go a little further because a lot of people confuse it with other things. Fawning, freezing, even just submission, but collapse is its own thing. Collapse literally is a nervous system response, and it's a very specific one. It usually kicks in when the brain and body don't see a safe way to fight or flee or even fully freeze. It's what shows up when the threat feels big, and the system says to you, fine, just give them what they want and maybe we'll survive this. Now, you probably heard the big ones, fight or flight. And these are about more resistance. You're either challenge the threat or you're running from it. Freeze is more about shutting down, pausing everything. You go numb, you disconnect, you stop responding, hoping the threat passes. But collapse is different. It's not about freezing the world. It's not about losing yourself in the moment to stay safe. It borrows pieces from freeze and fawn. You're going quiet, you're submitting, trying to calm the situation, but collapse goes further. You stop negotiating, you stop thinking, you vanish into agreement. And here's the hard part. It can look a lot like consent. It can look like you're okay, like you're choosing to comply, like you're going along with what's happening, but it's not a choice, it's a shutdown. And that's why people often confuse collapse with being easygoing or being submissive. But there's a world of difference between choosing to yield and compulsively surrendering to avoid abandonment, punishment, or shame. Healthy submission in kink or in real life is rooted in clarity. It's built on self-awareness, agency, trust. Collapse, on the other hand, is rooted in fear of being rejected, of things escalating, fear of disappointing, right? Fear of being left behind or left alone. Here's what that internal collapse might sound like. Just get through this. Don't rock the boat. If I push back, they're going to leave. It's easier just to let them win. Or maybe I was wrong anyway. Maybe I am too much. These aren't just submissive thoughts. They're self-erasing thoughts. Submission says, I give this to you because I want to. Collapse says, take it. Just don't hurt me. And that's not the same thing. Not emotionally, not relationally, not neurologically. So when someone tells me they feel shame after a scene or even after a simple disagreement, one of the first things I look is at whether they're operating from a place of grounded choice or collapse. Because you can't build trust or stability if one person is vanishing just to keep things intact. Collapse might have started as a strategy to survive something long ago, but for a lot of people, it's running in the background, shaping how they show up in love, in sex, in conflict, even in the quiet moments. And I want to start talking about now where this comes from and why people are trained early on to see losing as the only safe move when it's not. So where does this all come from? When this whole giving in was the only way to keep love or just to survive? Let's really talk about this, because no one's born with the urge to give themselves away. That's not a personality trait. That's something you learn, usually early, usually in relationships where love came with a price, possibly even from your family, right? I talk a lot about family and toxic dynamics, but these are the people for the first core of our life, first 18 years of our foundational life, that are teaching us qualities. And this can be learned from that, right? For some people, collapse began, in your home where love was just unpredictable, or where being honest got you punished. Maybe you had a parent who is emotionally volatile, or a caregiver who gave you affection only when you were pleasing or polite or invisible. So you learned early on, if I stay quiet, things stay calm. If I agree, they don't leave. And if I disappear a little, I stay loved. This is how collapse starts, not in adult relationships, but in the survival logic of a kid trying to keep connection intact. And the deeper the pattern, the more it fuses with your identity. That's when you stop saying, I had to keep the peace, and start saying things like, I'm just not good with conflict. I'm too much. I'm the problem. It becomes fused, not just with what you did, but with who you think you are. That's not character, that's conditioning. For a lot of people, these early stages, appeasing, caretaking, shutting down, get rewarded, or at least they get tolerated. The kid who doesn't cause trouble, the teen who keeps the peace, they're seen as mature or easy or even emotionally intelligent. But what they are is disconnected from their own voice. They've been trained to regulate other people instead of themselves, and that carries forward, especially as we grow into adult relationships. So a really good example of this is Elise. She grew up with a mother who got overwhelmed easily, and anytime she cried, asked for something, or even expressed anger, her mom would break down, crying, shutting down, or turning her back on her. So Elise learned that her emotions hurt people, and that speaking up meant causing pain, and as a kid, that was unbearable. So guess what? She stopped. Now as an adult, she avoids conflicts at all costs. She shuts down arguments. She apologizes when she's the one that got hurt. She tells herself that she's being kind or keeping the peace, but really, she's reenacting that old role. Be small, stay loved. And that's collapse. Not because she's weak, not because, she doesn't have something inside of her, but because she was trained to see her own voice as dangerous. And this shows up in a lot of forms. Maybe you had to parent your parents, or maybe no one made space for your anger, or so you learned to bury it. Maybe affection only came after you performed, after you were sweet, helpful, or agreeable. If love always came with the side of control, then giving in starts to feel like safety, even when it costs you something, even when it eats away at your sense of self. So if you've ever wondered why collapse, happens so quickly or so fast for you, why you give in even when you don't want to, or why you say yes when everything inside of you is telling you to say no, you're not crazy. You're probably playing out an old pattern that helped you survive something earlier. You're using old tools in a new life, and the body doesn't always know the difference. But here's the good thing. Patterns aren't always prophecies. You can interrupt the collapse, but first you have to recognize it in real time. And I talk about this all the time. I recognize it in patterns that I work with, the people I work with. I see this when people even comment or speak on social media, even so much today. When somebody was talking about an experience they were going through, I asked them just to sit with the pattern to understand it. Take it to the person they're working with. Because this is where you start going next. This is how you start noticing collapse before it swallows you, and how you move forward from reaction to choice. So how does it all show up, especially in relationships where collapse starts to repeat? And let's really talk about this, because this pattern just doesn't live in the past. It repeats itself like a really bad record, right? Quietly, sometimes daily, and often in ways people mistake it for maturity, forgiveness, or love. In everyday relationships, collapse can look like apologizing before the other person even finishes speaking, forgiving somebody for the moment they showed any discomfort, downplaying your own pain just to avoid being called too sensitive, right? Telling yourself it's not a big deal over and over and over again until you start to believe it. But here's what's really happening under the surface. You're erasing yourself slowly, repeatedly, until one day you're full of resentment and you don't even feel like you're allowed to express it. And let me tell you, that resentment builds, and it builds quietly. And recently, I think I was talking about relationships in a writing or somewhere else, where I talked about the things we don't say to our partners and how that resentment starts to anchor in. And eventually that wedge gets so big and has done so much damage to that bridge, there's no way to cross it anymore. It turns into emotional distance. It turns into shame. It turns into this vague feeling of being disconnected, not just from your partner, but from yourself. Because when you collapse and that becomes your default, it doesn't just suppress the conflict. It suppresses your clarity. It clouds your ability to even know what you want anymore. So you might want to start asking yourself some questions. Why does everything feel heavy when nothing seems wrong? Why do I feel unappreciated even when they say they care? And why do I keep giving so much and feel less and less like me? Collapse won't always scream at you, but it will hollow you out. Now, in our lifestyle, it can get even trickier. Collapse can get confused with surrender, especially in power exchange, where yielding is part of the dynamic, but collapse isn't real surrender. It's not chosen, it's coerced, even if the coercion is coming from inside of you. This is the submissive who says yes to dynamics that might make them feel smaller, not fuller, who agrees to a scene that doesn't sit right because they're afraid saying no is going to ruin the connection, who performs the role perfectly but feels sick afterwards. It's not about your consent paperwork, it's about emotional alignment. Are you choosing this, or are you reenacting something you never got to complete and heal from? So take Darren, for example. He finally leaves a relationship after months of being controlled. He's clear in his choice. He's calm, he's certain, and then a few days go by, and that silence hits him. Not hers, but his. The space, the void, the emotional noise, and that's when he collapses. 12 messages, apologies, explanations, promises to change, not because he believes them, but because the silence is unbearable. Because somewhere inside, he's convinced he must be the one at fault. Because collapse tells him, this is your pattern, you leave, but you're not allowed to stay gone. It's not regret, it's dysregulation. And it pulls him right back into the thing that broke him in the first place. And you see this everywhere. People who can't hold a boundary without instantly softening it. Partners who try to discuss a hurt but end up apologizing just for bringing it up. And folks who leave emotionally harmful dynamics only to come back, not because it's better, but because they can't tolerate the space. And then they wonder why nothing changes. Well, here's the truth behind all of that. Collapse might preserve the relationship on the outside, but it erodes the connection on the inside. It creates a dynamic where one person disappears to keep the other person comfortable. And that's not intimacy. That's emotional labor masquerading as love. Collapse doesn't just cost you your voice, it costs you your peace. And over time, it convinces you that disappearing is the only way to stay close, when in reality, it's what keeps you lonely, even in the relationships that look like it. They look fine from the outside. So if you've ever felt like, you're the one who always bends, always apologizes, always forgives first, even when no one asked you to, that's not generosity. It could be collapse. And the next step is learning how to recognize it before it happens. And that starts with awareness and a pause. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So let's really talk about something that's uncomfortable now. Why does it feel safer to collapse? Because for a lot of people, giving in isn't just survival. It feels like control. It feels like the only way to stop doing things and keeping things from falling apart. When everything in your system is screaming, don't get left, collapse becomes a kind of emotional prepayment. If I hurt myself first, maybe they won't hurt me worse. Collapse says, if I say sorry, maybe they won't escalate. If I back down, maybe they won't leave. And if I make myself agreeable, maybe I'll still be enough to keep. It's not a peace. It's a trade-off. And even though it might feel like humiliation later, in that moment, it feels like you've done something noble, like you've chosen calm, like you've protected the relationship. Collapse doesn't actually give you stability. It gives you silence. And there's a huge difference in that. For some people, collapse is also this kind of moral reflex, a way to stay good. If you grew up in an environment where your emotions made other people feel uncomfortable, if your speaking up got you punished, ignored, or guilt-tripped, then collapse starts to feel like character. You tell yourself it's better to be the one who bends, or at least I'm not like them, and I'm strong enough to take the hit. But that's not strength. That's self-erasure dressed up as maturity. And sometimes collapse is about more than safety. It becomes self-punishment. Some people use collapse to atone for feeling like they're too much, too emotional, too needy, too complicated. So they preemptively silence themselves to avoid rejection or convince themselves they deserve the discomfort. If I'm the one who messed up, I should fix it. If I'm hard to love, then I don't get to complain. It becomes this whole internal script. My needs are the threat. My silence is the solution. And here's where it gets even trickier. Collapse often gets praised. People will call you easygoing, understanding. God, you're so empathetic. You're so good at keeping the peace. But that's not peace. It's performance. And it's one that chips away at you every time you repeat it. And this is why I keep drawing that line between submission and collapse. Healthy submission is offered. It's based on trust and connection and clarity and choice. There is room to say no, room to negotiate, room to be human. Collapse doesn't have that room. It's tight, it's urgent, it's rooted in fear and guilt and the need to avoid rejection. It doesn't ask, do I want this? It asks, what will keep me from losing them, right? One says, I give this because I choose to. The other says, I give this so they won't leave. And if you've ever felt proud of how quickly you forgave, how little you ask for, how much you can tolerate, it's really worth asking yourself, is this actually my strength, or is this collapse wearing a mask? So what do you do with all of this? If collapse has been your reflex for years, if you've survived growing up, how you kept people close, how you stayed in safe relationships, how do you start to shift that? The answer is not fight it with force. The answer is to recognize it without shame. You can't unlearn a survival pattern by hating it. You have to meet it with honesty, not indulgence, but honesty. Collapse served a purpose. That doesn't make it healthy now, but it does mean that you get to stop blaming yourself for using it when you didn't have any other type of option here, right? So that's the first step. Awareness without judgment. You start noticing your internal script when things get tense. Does your body tighten before you even speak? Do you hear yourself apologizing halfway through your own sentence? Do you agree just to end the conversation and then feel resentful later? That's collapse trying to manage the threat. Not the threat in front of you, not necessarily, but the threat of your nervous system still believes is coming. So try saying to yourself in that moment, I feel the urge to disappear right now, right? This feels familiar, like I'm going to get small again. My body thinks this is dangerous, but I'm not sure my mind agrees. Just naming it begins to crack that pattern. So you go from inside the collapse to observing it. You're stepping outside the box, looking down on it. And that pause, that first internal step back, is where the choice starts. Now, you don't need to respond right away. You don't need to fix the mood. You don't need to soften your voice or apologize out of habit. You can pause. You can say, let me think about that. You can say, I'm not sure what I feel yet. You can say nothing at all and let the silence do its work. That pause might feel unbearable at first, especially if you were taught that silence equals abandonment. But here's the real truth. If your relationship can't survive a pause, it can't handle your truth. And that truth matters more than the comfort. And this is where the real work begins, giving yourself permission to exist without performance, to want something, to say no, to speak while your voice is still shaking, to feel discomfort and not fold under it. Collapse tells you that your needs are a threat, but they're not. They're just unfamiliar, especially if you've spent years prioritizing everyone else's problems, right? Or trying to rescue their problems and be the one that they come to so you can silence yours. So when you feel that familiar reflex starting to rise, to agree, to apologize, to rush towards repair, ask yourself, what would I do if I believed I mattered here? That question doesn't always come with an answer, but it does put you in a different seat, one where you're not just reacting, but you're starting to choose. And the truth is that this is about becoming someone who never bends. It's about someone who doesn't disappear. You can still be kind, you can still forgive, you can still yield, but from choice, not compulsion. Because if your softness costs you your voice, it's not softness. It's surrender to something you no longer deserve, right? And it's definitely a surrender to something that no longer deserves that power. So when that collapse shows up, don't shame it. See it, right? Slow it. And then ask yourself, what would you choose? Not out of fear, but out of alignment, right? So if I collapse, right? If this has always been your instinct, if that's what you're telling yourself, if it's how you've kept the peace, how you avoided loss, or how you make yourself smaller to stay connected, you're not broken. You're just doing what you had to. But now you get to pause. You get to notice when that old script is trying to run the show. You don't have to rewrite it, every piece all at once. You just have to stop mid-sentence and wonder, do I actually believe this right now? You don't need to become defiant. You don't need to start fighting. You don't need to just disappear, right? You just need to start showing up for yourself and stop erasing yourself. That's it. That's the move. Collapse taught you that keeping, yielding and stopping kept you safe, but safety without yourself is just silence. And you deserve more than that. So the next time that familiar pull shows up, the one that says, give in, just fix it, make it easier for everybody else. Ask yourself one question. What would I do if I believed I mattered in this moment? Even if you don't know the answer, even if you just sit in that question for a while, that's the beginning. That's the crack in the cycle. Let that pause just be enough. Now, I know this is a big episode. This is kind of emotionally driven. This was something that came out of an AMA that I really felt deserved a bigger answer here, which is why I brought it here today. And I wanted to talk about it. There are quite a few things that are starting to buzz around that I'm noticing I want to talk about here in the closing. I really do appreciate your AMAs because they, They're asking a lot of really thought-provoking questions, but I need to reiterate something here. Please do not ask me for therapeutically fishing questions. I am not going to answer that. More than likely, if I notice it and you're wondering why I haven't answered your question, or if you ask me something inappropriate, people are asking me some of these questions. I'm not going to go into why, because that's not what I do, but I'm going to ignore the questions. Straightforward. I want to be very open about that. Plus, I also need to preserve something for myself, and I need you all to understand this. I do this for a living. This is my job. All of this that I give out is because I'm trying to help. But if you try to take advantage of that, if you think that I work and do this all altruistically because I can't. This is still my profession and still my job. So if you're looking for help, reach out to somebody. And, there are links from me, but there are a lot of good therapists out there. Reach out, talk to someone, right? Just because I've opened up to help doesn't mean that can be taken advantage of. And I'm just trying to drive this point home because I'm seeing questions now that are asking for therapeutic advice. And if you're wondering why I'm not answering it, that's the reason, right? So I can't even do that ethically. I want to move to a couple of other things before I kind of wrap my show today. So today, if you follow me on social media on a couple places, I have raised some concerns about a couple of things I have been noticing around consent again. And I don't want to deviate too much from my show, but I want you all to do yourselves a favor. This has nothing to do with I'm trying to stop people from making money or it's an attack on what they're doing. But I think some of the things that we do, what I do in my world and what I've done in the past, we can't do here. I'm bound by very strict rules that govern privacy, right? I'm all about consent and I'm all about for it being informed. And unfortunately, when things happen, yes, there should be some sort of reporting process. But we need to be careful if we are going to start asking people to be trained to do what I do in a weekend class and go out and start taking reports and acting like they're law enforcement or quasi law enforcement therapists, and I don't know what else. And the only reason this is bothering me is because I'm seeing these patterns happen and people are selling these packages to teach you how to do this. And I'm going to be honest, you don't have the capacity to do it. It's a very difficult job, let alone how do you manage somebody's private lives? What are you going to do with that information? Ask yourself, if something happens, do you want some third party that you don't know from the community having your private information, asking you questions that might even end up re-traumatizing you? I was accused of being elitism because I called it out. But I'll tell you what, if your program can't handle a serious question around ethic morality, then I'm not the problem. Your program is. And I'm also seeing conversations online from other people who are doing a lot of therapeutic mimicry, meaning they're doing shows or putting up programs that mimic what we do in therapy. And I'm going to tell you right now, if I was you, I wouldn't do that. I would look into the person. If you've got a dominant, I don't know, somewhere in the United States on the East Coast perhaps, telling you that they can cure you with BDSM, I probably would, and then charge you therapeutic rates or more, I probably wouldn't go to them. That's even illegal. If you've got others that are running therapeutic adjacent programs or giving you handouts, and I've covered this before, please be very careful in what you're doing, right? Because this can end up re-traumatizing you. They can ask you the wrong questions. They can send you into an emotional spiral. They can fuel things you're still keeping inside because they're asking you things they shouldn't be asking, and they have no capacity to hold that space at all. They don't have the training. They never had the supervision. And here's the big one. They have zero accountability, right? Because all these programs are going to say is, oh, well, we just taught the stuff. Use it at your own responsibility. That's not ethical either. But right now, I'm going to just leave it at that. You can find my comments on social media. I'm not going to escalate it any further, but I'm kind of getting to the point that it is bothering me a little bit. So I wanted to say something a little bit more publicly about it. If you know me, that's not something I do all the time, but I have a huge problem with this. And, I would hope that this organization on the West Coast takes a hard look at themselves and what they're actually doing, because for a company that's supposed to be nonprofit, it doesn't seem like it's being done in that fashion. But, you know, hey, what would I know? I only do this for a living. Now, I do have a book out there, Tangled Desires, the intersection between psychology and BDSM, wherever you want to get your books or your ebooks. Here's a print version. I'm going to say this. I say it all the time. My friend convinced me to keep saying it, and a colleague. So I do. It's not the greatest book. It's a little repetitive. But if you're a new person, you're looking for some answers, you've got some questions about the community and maybe some stuff that you're wrestling with internally, there might be some answers in it for you, right? I ended up putting in a lot of psychology. My first thing I ever wrote. Not the greatest. It's definitely not going to make the New York Times bestseller list, but, you know, hey, it's the first book. I do have some other people I'm starting to contact. I'm going to be trying to put hello or hi there catsuit on the show. I still apologize to Red Warrior because I need to put her on. I've still got the thing to do out of the Middle East. And there's some other things. As far as me appearing on the Authentically Kinky podcast, I have been told coming in July, I believe next week, that episode's going to be released, but I'll keep you all posted. I'm just as much anticipating it as you are, because I get to hear myself speak to somebody else. That always makes me nervous. Just because I do this for a living doesn't mean I'm not human, right? We all make mistakes. Other than that, finishing this back off, let me know what you thought about this today. If this resonates, if you're dealing with this, if you're wrestling with this, right? You're not broken. You're not wrong. You're not crazy. You're normal. It's just a response. What I'm trying to let you know is that this behavioral pattern can be unlearned. Okay? So drop some comments. Let me know what's going on. Keep the show going. Share this with somebody who may really need to hear it. That would probably be even more beneficial. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.